Builder! What is this? This is the newly released Sony a7 Mark III. How much does it cost? Approximately $2,000. It's got an updated battery that allows longer recording times, amazing auto follow focus, updated color science, it's got dual card slots now, and it performs quite well in low light. Is it enough to make me switch over from the GH5? Almost. Done. Roll that intro. What's up, everybody? You're watching Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker, where the answers comes first, the reasons come last, but we are constantly and always still learning. So today we're going to be talking about the Sony a7 Mark III, and some of you guys had actually asked me whether or not I would even consider switching over from my GH5 or which one should I buy. Now, at first when it was announced, it definitely had a little bit of my attention. There was definitely some very welcome upgrades that Sony has done to the camera, but now that the reviews are starting to come out, it's got me very intrigued. So this week, we're gonna be talking about the features that would make me wanna switch, the features that I'm a little questioning about, and ultimately, would I switch everything to Sony, or would I actually use Sony cameras and Panasonic's together? So without further ado, let's get started. Now, the first thing to note is that these cameras are going head to head in the exact same market. They're both hybrid cameras, which means they do photography and they do videography both very well. Not to mention that they're at the same price point for the body. So on those terms, they're literally identical. And really, it just now depends on what feature sets you require for your work. That's gonna determine which camp you're gonna be leaning to. So the first thing that Sony has done with this a7 Mark III is now they're using a different battery. This battery is a lot larger than the original batteries that the a7 Mark I and Mark II uses, and it's actually got more capacity than the Panasonic batteries. And with that, the reviews have shown that it can record anywhere from like an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on the situation, which puts it a little bit lower than the GH5, but it's definitely in a camp that I'm happy with. Now, of course, I would probably figure out a way to use a USB power bank and make sure that I can use it for longer shoots, or in this case, I would use an AC dummy battery adapter, but it's really nice to know that Sony has finally given it a beefier battery so that people don't have to worry as much when they're using this camera. Number two, now this is something I've always admired about the Sony cameras. Not only can you shoot in full frame mode, but they also have a crop sensor mode. So if you're using a Sigma 18-35 and that is your lens, you can still use it on a Sony body. Like me, I have Rokinons that are full frame, so I can actually jump between the two lens formats or lens sizes and be okay. Not only that, the performance from the full frame to the crop sensor mode on the Sony a7 III seems to be pretty much similar. So there's really like no downsides to it. And you can actually just keep using crop sensor lenses and maybe only purchase a couple full frame lenses for specific things. And you're not forced to buy adapters that have optical speed boosters just to use the full lens. And that's another thing. I love the Viltrox and I love how Metabones gives you a nice optical quality, but I don't know, there's just something to be said with not having that extra piece of glass in the back and actually using the lenses natively. Number three, and you're probably wondering why I have this a little bit lower on the list, but the Sony a7 Mark III has amazing low light performance, second to the a7S Mark II. Now, while I'm not a big advocator for you to just use ISO, jacking it up and down to fix your exposure, I would much rather you stick with an ISO that you want to shoot at and then just dim the lights, flag the lights, bounce the light, what have you. But it's really nice to know that in a pinch, if you don't have enough time on an independent narrative set to set the lights and you just need to get that shot and move on, I'm happy to know that in those cases, jacking up the ISO gives me a nice clean image as well as decent dynamic range compared to the GH5 so that the whole set can just move on and get to the next part of the shoot. And the last reason is none other than the autofocus capabilities and the auto follow focus capabilities of the a7 Mark III. A lot of the tests have shown just how good it can actually track a fast-moving subject and still keep it within focus. And it actually does it in a very smooth way. It doesn't jump back and forth. It actually racks focus quite smoothly. And a lot of the tests have shown, excuse me, a lot of the tests have shown it's pretty darn good. It blows the GH5 away. The GH5 does not hold a candle to how the Sony is able to follow focus. Panasonic can keep talking about how they've updated their contrast detection algorithms, so on and so forth, but in all seriousness, Panasonic, yours just does not work. Not at the level of Sony and not at the level of Canon. I have no idea if you'll ever try to do something where it's going to match it. And if you do, like, kudos, I would love it. But as of right now, Sony is whooping your butt. All right, now we're finally to the cons. There's actually only one and a half, I would say, 1.5 cons about the A7 Mark III. And the first one is the IBIS. Now, I love the fact that it has IBIS in it, but the in-body image stabilization for the A7 Mark III is not as smooth as the GH5. And it makes sense because the camera bodies are very similar in size, but the A7 Mark III has a full frame 35mm sensor in it, which is twice as big as the GH5. So it doesn't have a whole lot of room to wiggle around in there. And it does show. The reason that this could be a potential slight deal breaker is because on the current action film that I'm working on as a DP that I talked about in my Viltrox 3 months later video, a lot of the action sequences are done handheld, but in a very specific way that gives you a nice smooth image and also just the way it's crafted. And because the GH5 has such an amazing image IBIS inside, we were able to pull it off without having to do much rigging. So that being said, until I actually have an A7 Mark III in my hands, or maybe I can borrow it from somebody and test it in the same situation, I'm going to say that maybe it's not going to be as smooth, maybe, but until then, I don't know. So the only half negative that I would say is that if I do suddenly invest in a lot more full frame glass, it's going to be more expensive than the Micro Four Thirds glass. And it makes sense because the lenses are bigger and there's more elements and bigger elements inside. But here's the thing though, if I want to have the best auto follow focus performance, I'm going to guess that I need the Sony branded manufactured lenses because they made the lens specifically to work with their cameras. The Sigmas do work well, and some people have tested the Canon with the Metabones and the Comlight from the Camera Store TV. You know, it works, but if you want the best performance, you're probably going to need to buy those Sony lenses, and they do get quite expensive. So with the Sony A7 Mark III out of the way, where does the GH5 stand in terms of what it offers that the Sony A7 Mark III does not? Well, first things first, the Micro Four Thirds glass is going to be cheaper. So in the long run, depending on what focal lengths you need, you're going to spend a little bit less money with the Panasonic camp, the Micro Four Thirds camp versus the Sony full frame camp. Number two, the Panasonic gives you the ability to shoot in 10-bit or 8-bit, whereas the Sony A7 Mark III is only going to give you 8-bit. I'm going to guess that the A7S Mark III will have the internal 10-bit feature, but you know, we don't know that yet. So if you require 10-bit color space, the Panasonic has that option, and you don't have to buy an external recorder to do it. Number three, and this is totally unique to the GH5, you have anamorphic mode for 2x anamorphic lenses. And this is actually something that I'm really going to get into. I already have a lot of the stuff that I need to make it happen, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And yes, you could use the Sony cameras and buy a 1.33 anamorphic, but if you want the true traditional anamorphic look, the 2x anamorphic is something that can be achieved with the GH5. Not only that, if you shoot in open gate mode, similar to how Hollywood does, you have a lot more room to crop around your images, especially if you're shooting an action sequence. Shooting an open gate 4.3 just gives you a lot of options, and better chance that you catch the shot the first couple times rather than 20 sometimes. And lastly, Panasonic definitely takes their time in terms of the research and development. And most of it is because, Sony is a behemoth of a company and they make their own sensors and they got a lot of stuff going on in there. So Panasonic can't just pump out a camera as fast. And I kind of think that this is a good thing because as people continue to use the cameras, and they use it for 2 to 3 years, they have a really good idea of what is missing and what they need. And that's why I feel like Panasonic, with each iteration, there's definitely a lot of major improvements, and you don't have to kind of play the guessing game, because I remember there was a lot of backlash when the Sony a6300 came out, and then all of a sudden, I think 6 months later, the Sony a6500 came out. Nobody knew it was coming, and a lot of people were mad that they bought the 6300 when they would have rather had the 6500. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is Sony has made a very, very welcome update to the Sony a7 line. The a7 Mark III has great low light performance. The autofocus is amazing, especially when you're following a subject. The upgraded battery is also amazing. Now you don't have to really worry about how much more battery life you have. You can actually operate it pretty much close to what the Panasonic has been doing ever since the GH4. And the low light performance is second to none to the a7 Mark III. So if you do find yourself in a pinch, that's definitely something that's really awesome. And lastly, the option to either use full frame or crop sensor lenses without needing to put an optic in front of it. I love that it has this mode, and especially if you're using full frame glass, you can actually get a nice extended reach in the crop sensor mode. And being able to jump back and forth between these two sets allows you to have a lot more lens choices. Again, I love using the Sigma 18-35, so I would probably pair that with most of the principal shots on the Sony a7 Mark III. And then I have my broken-ons for the more shallow depth of field shots, and I would be good in both camps. So the major question is, would I even consider switching everything I got to the Sony camp, or would I actually use the Panasonic and Sony cameras together, even though they're quite similar? Now, this is going to be a long spew of information, and I'm going to try to keep this as linear as possible. But here's the thing. The one thing that's keeping me from wanting to go over to the Sony camp is actually the autofocus, follow focus situation. I love the fact that it does super well with pretty much everything that people have shown. However, there's one thing that I feel like they're giving the camera the advantage, and it might not actually work the way I want to use it. What I mean is, they might be using a very long telephoto lens with a very shallow depth of field. However, they're literally standing in one spot. They might rock back and forth a little bit, which definitely would drive any focus puller crazy, and it does a great job. But the thing is, the camera was stationary and you're facing it and you're not moving too much in the frame. And if they do jump out of the frame and jump back in, it does catch it, it does come back. But again, that's not how I would use it in a cinematic situation. Now, the other thing is, yes, they're moving the camera on a gimbal, but if you look at a lot of those shots, the gimbal is simply just walking backwards and the camera stays in one spot facing forwards, and the subject is right in the center or maybe off to the side, and that's fine and everything. But the thing is, the camera is not orbiting, it doesn't go around its subject, and it doesn't show other things in the actual shot. So I talked about this in my gimbal video a while back. To make a really interesting narrative gimbal shot, you can't just walk and just face this way the whole time. You need to introduce a lot of different elements. And again, this is a video that I'm gonna tackle later, but the camera never just stays here. It might orbit around and look at something else and then come back to the subject, or maybe there's gonna be people walking past the camera as the subject is walking and doing his thing. And is the Sony camera gonna get confused? Is it gonna lock on and stay there and know what it is that I wanted to look at, or is it gonna just completely go haywire? Not only that, the way we've been shooting the action sequences for Maximilian, the movie that I'm a DP for, it's very unique, and the director has actually said it's kind of crazy because you're able to do and capture shots that people program into a robot. You're literally using your body and capturing the exact type of shots. Now, obviously, if you turned off the IBIS in the GH5, it would be shakier, but because the IBIS works so well in the GH5, it does a great job and it actually is quite smooth. However, here's the thing. Me and my team have to pull focus when we dance in and out of the shot, or if the actors get too close, or if I want to show something that happens closer during the actual action sequence. When we're moving at that quick of a pace, I'm kind of wondering, can the Sony actually keep up? Because it's very fast. Again, I can't really show you any more footage than I already have, and I'm definitely gonna show it to you guys when the official trailer is put out later this month, I think. But it's definitely very hard, and when we're pulling focus, sometimes we miss it, and then the poor actors and stuntmen have to do it again. So if the Sony can handle all of those situations that I just talked about, from gimbal work to how we do action work handheld, I would be very happy to switch everything over to Sony, like hands down. Because all the lenses I have right now, my Rokinons are full frame, my Sigma is a crop sensor lens, so all I would need to do is either buy the official Sigma adapter, or I could get the Metabones one, the Viltrox one, or the Comlight ones, and I'll be able to basically manipulate the aperture and use it for the IBIS. I'm not worried about that. Obviously, I'll have to buy some more batteries, but again, now that the batteries are actually matching what the Panasonic GH5s can do, not a big deal. So that being said, I'm sorry that was really long, but if the Sony camera can actually do all those things, I would not hesitate and switch over to Sony completely. Because again, they have a lot of features that basically match up to the GH5. They got the dual card slots, they got the good battery life. I can basically use a crap ton of lenses on it because it's a mirrorless camera, and the autofocus is just hands down a big seller, and a low light is awesome. So that being said, that is all for this week. If this video has made all the influence in your purchasing decisions, I would really appreciate it if you use my Amazon affiliate links down below. And if you have any questions or comments on any of the points that I talked about this week, definitely put it in the comment section below. I love talking with you guys, and you guys have actually done a really awesome job answering other people's questions too. I love watching you guys interact, and then I will jump in there when I can. And guys, that's what this is all about. We're a community of filmmakers, and we're helping each other out and informing each other of the best practices and the best tools so that we can craft our best stories. If you like this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.